Dietrich Bonhoeffer emphasizes the importance of context when thinking about truthfulness and moral action. In that spirit, I wanted to give you a brief historical overview of part of the context that Bonhoeffer found himself in. I'll leave this to you to read in detail, but the basic point is that for us, Bonhoeffer's decision to join the conspiracy against Hitler seems like the obviously right choice, given Hitler's tremendous evil. But for Bonhoeffer, it wasn't clear. And I think that reminds us of something important about life. Sometimes we look back and wonder why a decision we had to make at such and such time seemed so difficult, because as we look back, it seems like the answer should have been clear. In other cases, perhaps we may look back and see that a decision we didn't think much about, that perhaps we should have put more time into thinking about that. And so, as we all know from life experience, hindsight is, as they say, 20/20. We can see clearer when the moment has passed. But when we're in the moment, it's not always clear. I guess this is why we want to be careful. We want to think things through. We want to be careful how we live, as St. Paul encourages us to do. This is certainly what Dietrich Bonhoeffer is doing. He's being careful about how he lives. He's being careful about the decisions that he makes. Bonhoeffer likely took an oath. He was a member of the Abwehr, and I think that's the correct German pronunciation. And this is sort of the German, I guess, sort of the German counterpart to the CIA. And from the point of view of the German government, the Nazi government, Bonhoeffer was an agent working for the government, gathering information about what was happening outside of Germany. What Bonhoeffer was actually doing was establishing connections with people outside of Germany, so when Hitler was assassinated, he would have his connections and he would be able to be in immediate contact with people outside of Germany. I don't know if Bonhoeffer took this oath. If he didn't, nevertheless, by signing up to serve with the Nazi government, he effectively takes the oath. He pledges allegiance to the government. And in German culture especially, this is a very big deal. There are a number of high-ranking officers who can see that by 1944, Hitler has led Germany to the point of destruction. But they took an oath of loyalty to Hitler, and consequently they refused to turn against him. To basically pledge allegiance to the government and then to go against that by joining a conspiracy, that for any German who was patriotic, that is a big deal. A famous line from another book of Bonhoeffer's called The Cost of Discipleship is when Christ bids a man come, he bids him to come and die. Of course, this is a reference to the famous words from Jesus, take up your cross and follow me. And of course, the cross is a symbol of humiliation and also of death. Bonhoeffer resisted the Nazi regime from the beginning, not openly, not violently, but nevertheless, for example, he wrote a book on the Psalms, which is easily found at Amazon.com or in bookstores. And to us, that hardly seems controversial, but of course, remember the Psalms were written by, the Psalms comprise Jewish literature. And so for Bonhoeffer to write about Jewish literature, for Bonhoeffer to suggest that Jewish literature is important, that Jewish literature can feed our souls, that is a provocative thing to do in Nazi Germany. And this is the kind of resistance that Bonhoeffer is involved in earlier. Why is this decision for Bonhoeffer so difficult? I will very briefly run through some things. I won't give you a detailed history lecture. Let's just walk through some things. After World War I, Germany was defeated in the First World War, and Germany was humiliated. And we see that here. Germany's being squeezed by the victorious powers. For example, Germany loses its empire. which is humiliating. To be a serious country at this time in history, you know that you're a serious country if you have an empire. Well, Germany loses its empire. That is humiliating. Germany loses territory in Europe. That is humiliating. Germany is not allowed to have an air force. That is humiliating. Part of the challenge Bonhoeffer faced is that Germany had been humiliated, or at least many Germans felt that Germany had been humiliated. And the reason why, or a reason why many people will turn to Hitler, is because Hitler promises to undo that sense of humiliation. Hitler promises to give Germany its pride back. And unfortunately, for a time, Hitler kept that promise. Here's just an image of Germany about to be executed. And here we have the U.S. president and the French premier and the British prime minister about to execute Germany. This is obviously from the German point of view. To turn against the leader that gave us our sense of pride back, that is a big deal. Also, in Germany, there was the tremendous threat of communism, sometimes also called socialism. Those words were interchangeable. And a lot of people are worried about communism. A lot of business people are worried about communism. They may not like Hitler, but Hitler won't take away their private property. The communists are threatening our private property. To stand against Hitler is to stand against or to work against Hitler is to work against the person who will prevent the communists from taking over Germany. This is what some people will say. And so Bonhoeffer's in a tough position. Will he join the conspiracy against the person who, at least early on, gave our country a sense of pride? Will he work against the person who is a bulwark against the threat of communism? Hitler's movement engages in political violence in the streets, but once Hitler has power, the political violence goes away. You have a degree of order and stability. If you're a Jew, of course, you're under pressure and you're being persecuted. But if you're not a Jew, if you're part of the vast majority of Germans who are not Jews, Hitler's power, Hitler's rule brings a degree of security and order. And this is why many Germans voted for Hitler in the first place. To join a conspiracy against Hitler is to join a conspiracy against the person who brought order to the streets of Germany. Germany's economy after the First World War was a disaster. I'll let you look at the graph here yourself, but if you just look at the numbers, you can see that the German currency was worthless by 1923. In the United States, we had the Roaring Twenties, this decade of economic prosperity for many people. That was not the case in Germany. In Germany, after the war, as a result of economic chaos, as a result of political chaos, there's a deep feeling of psychological and spiritual dislocation. Hitler responds to all of this. We have to ask the question, why would rational, reasonable people vote for Hitler? Remember that Hitler used democracy to end democracy. He ran political campaigns. Why would people like us vote for him? They didn't know the Holocaust was coming. They didn't know that World War II was coming. They just listened to a politician who says, look, are you tired of the political instability? I will bring order. Are you tired of economic weakness? I will bring strength. Are you tired of feeling humiliated? I will bring back national pride. And this is part of the psychological context, part of the social context Bonhoeffer finds himself in. To take on Hitler is to take on the person that, many of his fellow Germans voted for politically. By taking on Hitler, am I a traitor? Am I a traitor? And to involve myself in this conspiracy, I'm engaging in deception. Are these the kinds of things that a civilized person who is a Christian should do? These are some of the questions that Bonhoeffer has to ask himself. This is German propaganda. You see the image there of the fellow in the white shirt. Hitler promises strength. He promises order. He promises national pride. We can see that by the early 1930s, Germany's political order, people are running to the extremes. They're running to the Nazi Party on one extreme fringe, they're running to the communists on the other extreme fringe, sort of the rational middle where I think Bonhoeffer would be. There are fewer and fewer people in the rational middle. Politically, people are running to the extremes. And Hitler, there he is there. My cursor's on him. He makes the appeal of strength and of national pride. When he got in front of groups, he was tremendously, he had tremendous charisma and tremendous speaking power. Not so much individually. Individually, he could be soft-spoken and boring, but put him in front of groups, and there's a sort of charisma that takes over, and people in crowds would feel as though they almost lost their minds as they were taken away by the tremendous power of Hitler's words. Bonhoeffer is pitting himself against these things. He's wondering about, what should I do in this context? So Hitler promises prosperity. He promises meaning. He promises order. He promises security. These are the kinds of things that Hitler promises. And unfortunately, for a while, it seems as if Hitler's keeping his promises. And Bonhoeffer finds himself in an increasingly small minority. And I encourage you to look at that photo of the Germans there who are so thrilled to see Hitler come by, and just to recognize that they are just like us. These are people who want order, they want security, they want peace, they want meaningful lives. And the situation was so stressful in the late 1920s, the 1920s, and coming into the early 30s, that reasonable people like us thought, given this context, Hitler is the best option. Not everybody in Germany, but a significant number of people in Germany actually voted for Hitler. You look at this image and you realize that people at the time did not necessarily see Adolf Hitler as such a scary person. And Hitler does bring order and stability and a sense of unity and meaningful rituals. Hitler was obviously very anti-Jewish. He was also anti-Christian. His long-term plan, once the Jews were eliminated, was to turn against the Christian churches. In the place of Christianity, he offers political rituals and political symbols and political events that could feel like elaborate church services sometimes. Unfortunately, we won't go into detail here, but unfortunately, Hitler's economic project worked for a while. Hitler's not supposed to have an air force. Germany's not supposed to have an air force, but Hitler promised, if you vote for my party, the Nazi Party, I will tear up that treaty from the end of the First World War. I will build an army. I will build an air force. He'll do a number of things that will employ a lot of people. And you can see that German unemployment plummets. Hitler is in complete power by 1933. And you can see that unemployment plummets. And what's so important about this is that in these same years, unemployment in the United States is very high. In 1939, unemployment in the United States is at about 17%. I don't know what the absolute numbers of people that would come to, but here's the basic point. Unemployment in the United States is much higher than it is in Germany. In Germany, the economy is red hot. In the United States, there's economic depression. It seems that Hitler has figured something out. And here Bonhoeffer is thinking about, what do I do in this context? Because I think this man is insane. I think this man is crazy. I think this man is evil. I think this man is dangerous. And then as the war begins in 1939, all of this becomes much more clear, and Bonhoeffer's wondering what he should do. We can see that when Hitler comes to power, soon after Hitler comes to power, unemployment declines rapidly. And you can see that the support for Hitler's party in the late 1920s goes up dramatically in the late 1920s. So this is very unfortunate that as Hitler's party, as the Nazi Party gains control, the economic program he puts into place does work for a while. And Hitler does keep his promise to give the German people a sense of pride back. We won't go into historical detail again, but one step after another, Hitler demonstrates to the world that Germany will stand up, that Germany will no longer accept the humiliation that Germans felt after the First World War. Time magazine recognized Hitler as Man of the Year in 1938, not saying that the editors of Time magazine liked Hitler, but just to recognize that here is a person of tremendous importance. And Hitler very quickly builds an empire. You look in the red there. Hitler very quickly builds an empire in the first years of the Second World War. It seems that Hitler is very, very successful. And so how can I, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, how can I join a conspiracy against a leader who seems to be so successful? But then when the tide turns and the bombs are falling and German forces are in retreat everywhere, in that case, how can I turn against my country when it's under so much pressure? In either case, I feel like I'm being a traitor to my country, and I took an oath of loyalty, and I'm engaged in regular deception as part of this conspiracy. For us now, it doesn't seem like a problem. Of course, you should do something to try to take down Hitler's regime. That's obvious to us. It was a tougher call for Bonhoeffer. He saw that this Nazi regime was wicked, not only for the persecution of the Jews, and Bonhoeffer himself was not aware of the Holocaust as we are now, but certainly he knew of the persecution of the Jews. But Bonhoeffer was more aware that the Nazi regime didn't murder only Jews, but the Nazi regime murdered the developmentally disabled. The Nazi regime murdered people who had mental retardation. The Nazi regime turned against others deemed unfit. There was this idea of social Darwinism, that is the application of the idea of the survival of the fittest to human society. I've given you a quote here from a German philosopher called Frederick Nietzsche, some of whose ideas were very influential. The Nazis read certain things from Nietzsche and were influenced by that. So Bonhoeffer can see on the one hand that this is a government that, at least for a time, seems very successful. But it's also a government that is clearly evil, even though Bonhoeffer does not know the extent to which this regime is evil. And unfortunately, it's very sad to say, but unfortunately, the reason we know of Dietrich Bonhoeffer is because he was so rare. There are so few Christian leaders who actually participated in some kind of resistance against the Nazi regime. This is a very unfortunate thing, that I think we have to say most people who regularly went to church in one way or another went along. Perhaps many of them did not give their open support, but neither did they resist. But Bonhoeffer is one of the few who decided not to resist openly, but to resist in other ways, by, for example, promoting the reading of the Psalms and by joining the conspiracy against Hitler. Bonhoeffer absolutely rejected the idea that there is some human life that is unworthy of life. This is a Nazi slogan, life unworthy of life. We're going to do these guys a favor and put them out of their misery, right? This is what the Nazis will do. But Bonhoeffer knows that this is evil, that there's no such thing as human life that is unworthy of life, that no government should decide which individuals within a society, individuals who've committed no crimes, that no government should have this sort of godlike power to decide that, well, so-and-so has committed no crime, but so-and-so still has a life unworthy of life. Well, Bonhoeffer can't go along with this, so he has to decide what to do. As we look at the blue arrows there, we can see that as the war goes on, Germany comes under more and more pressure. And this doesn't make it easier for Bonhoeffer. Because now is when we Germans need to hang together against the common foe. We need to support our government against all of these external foes. So this is a tough decision that Bonhoeffer feels that he has to make. Again, not tough for us, but tough for him. Of course, in our lives, we don't face questions like this. It's very unlikely that any of us will face, a question like Bonhoeffer faced. And I'll leave this screen to you to read, but, in our own society, the the sort of question that Bonhoeffer had to ask, it's unlikely that we'll have to ask a question just like that. But there are other instances that come up, and on this screen and the next one, I relay to you a scenario that comes from a situation in Central America. And I'll just summarize it here. I mean, the situation is that there's a desire to get some people together to do a work project. And as part of the work project, they'll make some money. This will take place in a very poor area, and the people will gather in a room, but it's a very crowded area. And it's just not possible that word won't get out that these people are working in a room. And questions will be asked. What are you doing in that room working together? And the truthful answer is, we are working and we're making some money. And of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who live in this area, we 5 or 6 people have been chosen to do this, which means that the overwhelming majority in that area who would like the work just as much, they don't have it. And so you're going to have the problem of jealousy. That some people will understandably ask, what makes you so special that you get to do this work and the rest of us don't? And in this particular place, that can very quickly lead to violence. And it could even lead to extreme violence. And so here's a context. Here's a context that's very different from what most people in the United States ever experience. A context of deep distrust, a context of deep jealousy, and a context of violence. And as I say here, the context is so corrupt and full of conflict. Telling the simple truth about a small project that leads to income for a small number of people, just over a 1-week period, would probably lead to jealousy and verbal conflict. It could even lead to violence. Given that, is it better to forego the project altogether? If we can't provide work for everybody, then should we provide work for nobody? If we go ahead with the project, is it a good idea to have everyone involved agree to some untruth if asked about what's going on? For example, that these particular women involved in this particular project are doing the project because family members in the United States asked them specifically to do it, and they're not being paid. This is voluntary work. But the reason we're doing it is because we've been asked to do this by our family members in the States. This is not a very good untruth. And I mean, this is a question that I'm working with right now. Because as I make this video, this is something that I'm thinking about in relation to my own work. The simple point being that in the United States and in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, where I live, the kinds of questions that Bonhoeffer had to deal with, I mean, it's very foreign and seems abstract. It's difficult for me to believe that I'll ever be confronted with such a thing. But perhaps, this is a bit relevant as I go to a very different context that is much less trusting, that is much more violent, where jealousy is common and where jealousy can very quickly lead to violence. In that case, can we really be truthful? Or is the better thing to come up with some response to the inevitable questions that are not true? But then how could that be? Because everyone involved in this project identifies as a Christian. How could it be that Christians would agree to say something that's not true? But then the problem is, if we say the truth, then that has all sorts of potential repercussions attached. So it's not an easy decision. It's not an easy call. Well, in any event, I leave these thoughts to you to consider. And I hope, if nothing else, that the reading from Bonhoeffer gives you an occasion to think about decision-making, particularly when those times come when we have to make a tough call. Okay? We'll see you. Bye.